The first thing they say is that it wasn't even that funny. Not clever, not poetic. Just a rough laugh, the kind that rises fast and burns hot, like a spark in a dry barn. But it was enough. Enough to get a man killed. They say his name was Aelric. Peasant, 20-something. Too thin, hands cracked from winter labor, hair matted under a wool hood. Known in his village not for strength, not for piety, but for the way he could make even the blacksmith chuckle after a long day. He told stories. He had timing. He was nobody, and that made him dangerous. It happened in the alehouse, stone-walled, smoky, low-ceilinged, more stable than tavern. Aelric was there with 3 others, passing a jug of boiled cider that had long since lost its warmth. The war had come and gone from their part of the country and left only taxes behind. Taxes and silence. But Aelric never liked silence. He leaned in and said it. No one remembers the words exactly. One man said it was about the king's chin, how it looked like a goat's backside. Another claimed it was worse, something about the queen, a stable boy, and the missing silver goblets. But the version most repeated, the one whispered with nervous smiles, was only 7 words long. The crown sits heavier on fools. Laughter. Not raucous, not wild, just a short, sharp burst. One of them slapped the table, another raised the jug. It was done. Forgotten. Except for the man by the door, wrapped in a traveler's cloak, face shadowed, hands clean. He hadn't smiled, hadn't touched a cup. When Aelric looked over, the man had already turned away, slipping into the dark without a word. The others joked about it. "Royal tacksmen don't drink like that," said one. "Probably a monk." They laughed again. 2 days later, the priest refused to speak to Aelric at the well. 3 days later, his name was missing from the village ledger. 4 nights after the joke, boots came at midnight. This story was almost never told, but it was too cruel to forget. If you're still here, if this tale holds your breath, subscribe. You'll need it. The fire hasn't even started yet. They came without torches. That's how the villagers knew it was real. Not soldiers, not the kind with banners or polished steel. These men wore padded leathers, carried clubs, not swords. Their boots were silent in the frost. No shouting, no demands. Just a knock. 3 times. Measured. Like someone knocking on a coffin. Aelric's mother opened the door. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at the men as though she'd been expecting them for years, and finally they'd made good on the promise. Inside, Aelric was asleep on a straw mat beside his younger sister. He sat up too fast, hit his head on the beam. His mother whispered, "They're here." He didn't ask who. He already knew. There was no warrant, no explanation. The leader of the men, thick-necked and mute, simply gestured. Aelric stood, still barefoot. He reached for his coat. One of the men stopped him. Another handed him a rough cloth bag. That was mercy of a kind. His sister asked, "Where are you taking him?" No one answered. They didn't bind his hands. There was no need. The walk to the cart was short. The whole village stood watching from their doors, behind half-shuttered windows. Old men who'd seen conscriptions before. Women who knew the shape of a goodbye. Children who were told not to stare but did anyway. As he climbed into the cart, Aelric turned once, not to plead, not to curse, just to look, one last time. They took the old road east, toward the capital. The cart creaked beneath him, wheels groaning over the frozen ruts. Trees blurred past in the moonlight. He tried to ask one of the guards if he could speak with the magistrate. The man spat in the dirt and looked away. It was morning by the time they reached the city gates. Stone walls rose like cliffs. Flags snapped in the wind, royal blue and gold. The gatekeeper took one look at the guards, nodded once, and opened the way. No words were spoken. None needed. They were bringing in a voice that had dared rise above its place. They pulled into a courtyard behind the southern watchtower. Aelric was dragged from the cart, his bag ripped from his hands, his coat torn. He didn't struggle. He had no illusions left. The stone under his feet was cold and wet, stained with years of other footsteps that had never walked back out. An iron door opened, a stairwell yawned below, and with one final look at the winter sky, Aelric descended into the dark. The cell was a hole, not metaphorically, not poetically. A literal stone cavity carved beneath the old southern tower, just tall enough to stand, just wide enough to lie curled. The walls sweated cold. The floor was uneven, always damp, and something lived in the far corner. Rat or ghost, it didn't matter. There was no bed, no straw, no window. The first night he tried to sleep sitting up. The second night he stopped trying. There was a bucket. It was emptied irregularly. Once a day, or maybe twice, time blurred, they gave him water and a crust of bread too hard to bite without bleeding. The guard who brought it never spoke, just slid the tray through the slot and waited, watching. Aelric stopped looking back. On the third day, if it was the third, a new voice came. It echoed from beyond the cell door, educated, dry, formal like parchment cracking in a warm hand. "Peasant, you are being held for sedition, treason by tongue." No answer. "Do you understand the charge?" Aelric cleared his throat. "It was a joke." "A joke," the voice repeated, almost with amusement. "Then say it again. Let us hear." Silence. "You see, peasant, the words matter little. The laughter. They said you made others laugh. I didn't mean to. But you did, and that's what matters. Men remember laughter longer than banners." The next hours, days, were filled with questions. Who was there that night? Who laughed first? Did anyone else speak against the king? Did a priest encourage the mockery? Did the villagers conspire? Each time, Aelric gave the same answer. No. At first he tried to explain. The cider, the cold, the harmlessness. He tried to speak like a man. Clear, honest, calm. They didn't want calm. They wanted cracks. The banging started, not on him, yet on the walls. Metal pipes slammed, voices shouted scripture at all hours, footsteps paced above, just loud enough to snap him from sleep each time his eyes closed. They made the air thick, foul, filled with rot and damp mold. They poured water through the floor slats until he stood shivering knee-deep, stripped and shaking. He began to lose track of his own voice. When he tried to speak, the words came in fragments. One night, they let him sleep. The next, they screamed until he clawed at his own ears. When he collapsed, a priest knelt beside him, whispering, "Confess! Repent! Spare your soul." "I'm not a traitor," Aelric whispered. "Then say who is." He said nothing. They gave him spoiled meat, then nothing at all. They left him in the dark so long he forgot what light looked like. Time bent. His own name began to feel foreign. He started talking to the stone because the stone didn't talk back. When they finally came for him, he didn't resist, because by then he understood. This wasn't justice. This was rehearsal, and he was being prepared for a performance he would not survive. The trial was theater. But unlike theater, there was no audience that mattered, only spectators. They dressed Aelric in a thin shift, too short to cover his knees. His wrists were bound, though he barely had the strength to lift them. 2 guards held him under the arms as they brought him into the hall. It wasn't a court in any true sense. A small chamber in the eastern wing of the citadel, with a raised platform, a wooden chair, a table for ink and seal, and behind them, 3 men in robes too clean for justice. No jury, no defense, no witnesses save those the crown had already chosen. Aelric swayed on his feet. The guards tightened their grip. A scribe cleared his throat. On this day, under the gaze of His Majesty's appointed court, the man known as Aelric of Dunlow is charged with verbal treason, sedition, and blasphemy toward the anointed sovereign, King Armund III. The words fell like stones, precise and rehearsed. The accused did, on the night of the feast of St. Baron, utter mockery against the sacred crown, inciting laughter, disrespect, and the erosion of public loyalty. Aelric opened his mouth. It was, "Silence," the magistrate said, without raising his voice. "You will speak when addressed." He didn't speak again. The evidence was read. A statement from a man unnamed in court, but known to Aelric now. The silent stranger in the tavern, the one who hadn't laughed. A government ear, placed not to protect the people, but to preserve fear. The man had claimed Aelric insulted the king's limp, imitated his speech, and declared the crown sat heavier on fools than on kings. It was a lie. But in this place, truth wasn't what was said. It was what was useful. The magistrate asked Aelric if he denied the words. He tried to find something in his throat, anything, but all that came out was, "I spoke in jest." That was enough. There was no deliberation, only a nod from the bench. Sedition, blasphemy, treason of the tongue. He was not sentenced to hang, not beheaded, not even lashed. No, those were punishments for soldiers, nobles, men of consequence. For Aelric, there would be fire. Execution by flame, to take place in the King's Square, noon, 3rd day hence, public and permanent. The gavel was a simple stone, slammed against oak. The guards lifted him again. The scribe dipped his pen. No one in the chamber looked at him, because by then he wasn't a man. He was a message. The pyre rose like a monument. They built it in the same square where the market stood each morning, where women sold salted roots, where children chased stray dogs, where Aelric once bought an apple for a girl he never kissed. Now the cobblestones were swept clean, cleared for spectacle. At dawn, they began hauling wood, thick beams for the base, thinner ones soaked in pitch stacked crosswise. The scaffold was raised knee-high, bound with iron nails. The stake, blackened from use, stood at the center like a grave waiting to be filled. Aelric could hear the hammering from across the street. His holding cell had one slit in the wall, high and narrow. Through it, he saw slivers of sky and smoke. Nothing else. He hadn't spoken in 2 days. His throat was too dry, his mouth too cut. Once, the guard brought him water and called him Ghost. Aelric didn't respond. He wasn't sure if he still had a voice. By midday, the square teemed with people, not just villagers. Soldiers in polished cuirasses, merchants with shaded hats, noble ladies behind gauze veils. A priest stood by the scaffold, clutching a book he never opened. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. Ale flowed early. It felt like a fair. It smelled like judgment. The city bell tolled once. 2 guards dragged Aelric from the cell. His feet scraped the stone, bare, swollen, cracked. Someone had dressed him in a coarse linen robe, rope-tied at the waist. The fabric clung to his ribs. One arm dangled limp. He stumbled once. Neither guard stopped walking. When they reached the square, the crowd parted. Not in silence, in calculation. No one wanted to be too close, but no one wanted to miss it. They tied his wrists behind the stake, rough hemp biting into broken skin. His knees gave. One soldier tightened the ropes, not to hold him still, but to keep him upright. The spectacle demanded posture. The magistrate mounted the scaffold, unrolled a parchment, read with ceremony, not conviction. Let it be known that Aelric of Dunlow, by his tongue, has committed an act of sedition against the sacred crown, mocking the divine order and the Lord's anointed. No one booed, no one cheered. They waited. The torch was dipped. Flame caught fast. Pitch hissed. Wood cracked. The fire reached the base of the pyre. Aelric blinked once. Then the heat touched his legs. He screamed, not with words, but with sound, raw and jagged like the splitting of timber. It rose above the crowd, over the rooftops, into the pale winter sky. His body twisted, arched, seized. Ropes held, skin blackened, cloth ignited. The stench hit next. Burnt hair, scorched leather. The sick, sweet perfume of fat turned to smoke. A child began crying. No one moved. They watched. The flames rose to his hips, then his chest. His mouth opened, but no more sound came. Eyes boiled, flesh blistered. When the fire reached his throat, his head jerked back, and something inside him gave way. A moment later, he stopped moving, but they didn't douse the fire. It burned until all that remained was ash, char, and memory. Not for justice, for permanence. By dusk, the square was empty. Ashes smoldered where the stake had stood. The scaffold was torn down before nightfall. Guards shoveled the remains into a black cart. No markings, no prayers. They dumped it in a trench beyond the city wall, where plague bodies had once been burned. No headstone, no cross, not even a name. The king's decree was clear. No mourning permitted. To grieve a traitor was to confess sympathy. In Dunlow, his name vanished overnight. The priest stopped mentioning him during Mass. His mother's cottage was stripped, tools confiscated, mule seized. The land reallocated to a tax collector's cousin. Neighbors spoke of her in past tense, even while she still breathed. His sister was sent away. Some said to a convent. Others, less kind, whispered worse. But the silence didn't last. First came the murmurs in the fields, reapers who'd pause at midday and say nothing for a minute too long. Then in the taverns, where laughter returned, but never without caution. Eventually, the story surfaced again. Not in sermons or songs, but in warning. Not about treason, about cruelty. Parents told their children, "Mind your words or the fire will find you like it found the boy from Dunlow." No one called him by name, but everyone remembered him. The Crown tried to bury it, burned the arrest records, erased his name from the rolls, denied the execution ever occurred. The magistrate was reassigned. The guard who lit the torch was found dead 2 winters later, throat cut in an alley. Rumors bloomed like mold. Some said Aelric's ghost walked the square at night, mouth open, face blackened, eyes melted shut. Others claimed his soul had been carried by crows, now nesting in the rafters of the royal chapel. One drunk swore he saw the king himself flinch during a sermon when a child in the pew behind him whispered, "The crown sits heavy on fools." That line, that cursed, forgettable joke, survived longer than the fire. It passed from lips to ears across generations, stripped of name, stripped of source, but never of weight. It slipped into riddles, into plays, into stories told by traveling bards. The monarchy never acknowledged it again, but they felt it, because in the end they had burned the body, but not the idea. And ideas, once spoken, do not die. They wait, smoldering beneath memory, like embers under ash.